Thank you very much, Kip. And thank you all for coming. How fun to see so many ROLM people. ROLM was founded in 1969, and it revolutionized two industries, military computers and telecommunications. And it established a work-play lifestyle that remains unique to Silicon Valley today. In August of 2011, Ken Oshman died, the O in ROLM. And a month later, my husband, Bob Maxfield, turned 70, as have Walter Lowenstern and Gene Richardson. And these were all wake-up calls to me that the inside story of ROLM could easily fade away. I met with Leslie Berlin, who is head of archives of Silicon Valley for Stanford University, and she assured me that ROLM was very important to the starting up of Silicon Valley, and that it was well worth my time to embark on a book. I'm very pleased that 2.5 years later, the book is here, and Leslie Berlin offered to write the introduction. The four guys who founded ROLM were all electrical engineers. They were graduates of Rice University, and they were lured to Silicon Valley in the early 60s by Stanford University's work-study program. They could work full-time, earn a full salary, attend classes at Stanford for advanced degrees with full tuition paid. All four of them earned master's degrees and 3 earned PhDs. Stanford's work-study program is one of the key answers to the question, why did Silicon Valley happen here? These guys had a lot in common, but it was Monday Night Poker that put them together to talk about forming a company. And in 1968, they decided to do something in technology. This was the state of the world in a short picture at that time. And the state of the venture capital community was that it was non-existent. There were a few individuals who were willing to fund a venture, but there were no companies. Individuals like Arthur Rock, Gene Kleiner, and Jack Melchior. Arthur Rock was interested after Ken Oshman wrote a business plan, but he wanted Max Palevsky to he wanted Max Palevsky's opinion. So picture this, as these guys head down to LA. Before that, I do that, though, I'll explain that the reason Rock wanted Palevsky's opinion was that Rock had just made considerable money on an early investment he had made with SDS, Scientific Data Systems, which Palevsky had founded. And by the way, Rock had just invested, a founding investor, in a brand new magazine called Rolling Stone. In The Money Game by Adam Smith, the nonfiction bestseller of 1967, Palevsky was asked what difference his $50 million share of the SDS sale had made in his life. He responded that there was no difference, that he had the same house and the same friends. Richardson, Oshman, and Maxfield looked forward to meeting this down-to-earth millionaire. Along with Arthur Rock's assistant, Dick Cramlett, they flew to LA and drove to Bel Air, where they were shocked to enter a grand circular driveway that led to a brand new, enormous chateau. To Maxfield, it looked like Versailles. A butler answered the door in full livery. A white starched shirt, black long-tailed coat, and black pants with satin leg stripes. They were shown into a mammoth living room where they perched for some time on the edge of a deep velvet sofa and were served little dried-up bear claws, according to Richardson. Palevsky finally entered, wearing a baby blue jumpsuit. In the midst of the conversation, Palevsky's attractive new wife drifted through in a negligee. Perhaps that took the guys off their game. Pilevsky wasn't impressed with them or their plan, and Rock declined to invest, as did all of the others. Oshman returned to Melcor with a sweeter deal. How about being equal partner with the four of them? All five of them put in $15,000 for what is today the equivalent of $500,000 to embark on a hardware startup. They moved into this prune shed at the corner in an orchard that was being bulldozed at the corner of Wolf Road and 280, which is what was happening all over the Valley of Heart's Delight at that time. It wouldn't be known as Silicon Valley for another 4 or 5 years. They were determined to make the world's toughest military computer. They licensed the Data General Nova and repackaged it into a air transport raft about 1/3 the size of what the Nova itself was. And they had just 5 months to demo it at the fall 1969 Joint Computer Conference. They made it, and that was the 1601. It met all the requirements for extreme ranges of temperature, shock, vibration, and humidity, whatever tanks, jeeps, and airplanes could toss at it. It was the first computer that the military could take in the field. And it was the first time that the military could buy a computer off the shelf within 30 days. Up to this point, all computers have been requests for quotes, designed, owned by the military, and designed specifically for each application. Delivery took between 12 months and 18 months. A couple of things happened at the Joint Computer Conference that convinced Richardson that this venture might fly. First, a woman in uniform came by the booth. Richardson said, "I thought she was with the Salvation Army with all her ribbons and stars. But I could tell from her questions that she clearly knew a lot." The woman turned out to be U.S. Navy Commander Grace Hopper, who was highly significant in the development of early computers and later the computer language Ada. Second, 2 suits came to the booth. One of the men had previously canvassed the show, and he was showing his senior vice president from IBM the highlights of the show, and one of those was ROLM. The 1601 was promptly followed by the 1602 within a year, and that was a ROLM designed computer. It was during this time that Maxfield met with a vendor who himself was a co-founder of his company. The man was shocked to learn that there were 4 founders of ROLM. He said that was too many. He predicted that within a year there would only be 2. And in fact, within 18 months, Gene Richardson was out of the company, and Walter Lowenstern was ROLM's point man in Washington, D.C. at the Pentagon for sales to the military. He was out of day-to-day operations. Ken Oshman was CEO and visionary, and Maxfield was his strong, quiet right arm in technology and engineering. The 1602 was promptly followed by the 1603. ROLM was successful, and it smacked right up against a requirement called rights in data. This required that certain military vendors provide complete cost information and design documents. The policy was intended to give the government the rights to equipment designs for which it had paid the development costs, a reasonable concept. The policy also policed price gouging by forcing disclosure of costs. However, the government had not paid for the development of ROLM computers and therefore had no moral right to own the designs. ROLM was not in the least bit inclined to share them with anyone. The policy also had the possible outcome of forcing arbitrary price reductions on ROLM's already low-price system just because ROLM was able to achieve a good profit on the product. Oshman refused to comply with the rights and data requirement. When a general from Macon, Georgia called and said, "Son, you have to hand over that data," he replied, "No, sir, we won't do that. We've been slogging a long time, taking a lot of risks. If we're a very competitive product that provides your solution, that should be all that counts." Oshman hung up and made a lot of phone calls and got a waiver to that requirement, but it was a serious warning bell. ROLM needed a new market, one that was less regulated, larger, and one that could also be revolutionized by many computer technologies. ROLM selected telecommunications. And this was the state of telecommunications even in the mid-70s. All companies have a PBX, a private branch exchange, to handle incoming calls, route the calls within the company, and handle outgoing calls. Even in the mid-70s, plug-in switchboards were often in use. All PBXs were electromechanical. A call had to be transferred back to the operator. Couldn't be forwarded on to another extension. And telephones were hardwired to the wall, so telephones could not be easily, extensions could not be easily changed. Telecom managers received a bill that had a couple of large categories: rental of all equipment, local phone call fees, and long-distance phone call fees. Telecom expenses often amounted to up to 10% of companies' corporate expenses, and yet there was no way to manage it. ROLM hired 2 key managers from HP. One was Jim Casson to do the engineering and design, and the other was Dick Moley for marketing. Moley said, I didn't know what the hell a PBX was, but I had that Silicon Valley urge to take a lead. When ROLM introduced its CBX, let's go the other direction, in 1975, it replaced those plug-in keyboards with this electronic console. Somebody here worked on the console, right? Yeah?
You can see earlier version of that.
Okay. This was the prettier picture of that. The CBX cabinet was painted orange to distinguish it from all the brown and black boxes that were out there. The CBX name was so generic that it could not be trademarked. Computerized branch exchange. Moley was not disturbed by that. He said within 12 months, ROLM would own that name. It had the system had a total of 128 kilobytes of memory. The programs were written in assembly language. For the first time, users had capabilities at their fingertips they had no idea existed. They could put a call on hold. They could forward a call anywhere in the company. They could put their phone in Do Not Disturb. They could forward their phone to another office if they were going to spend the afternoon somewhere else. Telecom managers could find out which extensions made phone calls and could allocate costs to departments and could route long-distance calls over least expensive trunks. For many customers, the CBX was their first experience with technology. At first, the information that the CBX configuration was recorded on cassette tapes, and then later, floppy disks. These seemed to baffle customers to no end. One was asked to make a copy, so he put it in the Xerox machine and sent back the paper. Another made the copy correctly, but folded up the disk into a regular envelope and sent it back. Another complained that the floppy disk had a very short lifespan, and when service call was made, They went out and found that the discs were attached to the side of the metal cabinet with large horseshoe magnets. The problem cleared up when it was explained that magnets erase data. ROLM went public in September of 1976. Ken Oshman convinced Gene Richardson to come back into the company. He stayed for about 18 months, and when he left, he said it wasn't any more fun the second time around. But he was there for the IPO, and the company did not have to make any explanation of, so where's the R in ROLM? The stock went out at $14 a share, and it promptly dropped to 10 and stayed there for a year and a half. Oshman said it was not a greatly successful IPO, but it was a great investment. ROLM actually went public not for the funds, but for the credibility. Their primary targets were Fortune 500 companies, and they wanted to deal with a public company, particularly one that was on the New York Stock Exchange. And in fact, ROLM met the requirements to be on the New York Stock Exchange within a year. AT&T owned 90% of the market. Actually, they owned 100% of the market when they were the phone company in 90% of the US. GTE had 10%, and other small telcos had 10% of the US. AT&T was actually not a monopoly anymore. That had been in telephone service, definitely for providing dial tone and phone service. But in providing equipment, companies and individuals, as of 1968 Carter decision, could rent equipment. Could buy equipment from anyone rather than having to rent equipment from AT&T. Nonetheless, AT&T acted as if it were a monopoly, and customers did too. It was what they were used to through all those years. And there were really no other viable choices. AT&T was the largest corporation in the world with $3.2 billion in revenue when $10 billion ROLM went head-to-head with it. AT&T tried every dirty trick in the book it could to kill competition. It did everything other than improve its notoriously outrageous customer service. Comedian Lily Tomlin famously and repeatedly parodied AT&T service on the wildly popular television comedy Laugh-In. Ernestine, Tomlin's phone company operator, would answer a service call, a one ringy dingy, a two ringy dingy, and then she would roll her eyes in utter boredom while a customer complained on the line about some problem. Then she'd interrupt and say, "Sir, we're the phone company. We don't care. We don't have to." That appeared on posters and bumper stickers everywhere. And ROLM helped distribute them. Probably even printed a few. ROLM moved into its iconic facility at 4900 Old Ironsides Drive in late 1977, really moved in 78. It had built multiple single-story buildings on 21 acres with winding shaded paths next to a babbling brook. Before moving in, employees were asked, did they want to continue with Christmas parties or would they prefer to have a gym? The resulting athletic facilities were astounding. Two pools, one of them had 3 lap lanes, jacuzzis, saunas, parkours, tennis courts. Classes were offered and sports clubs were sponsored. ROLM had one of the best cafeterias. In fact, it had the first gourmet cafeteria, and that kept employees on campus for lunch, brought many of them early for breakfast, and they stayed late for dinner. There were even some people, I believe, who are here, who came to lunch from across the street. ROLM's Great Place to Work philosophy enabled it to hire the best employees from within Silicon Valley and to retain them. It fostered teamwork, accountability, and provided generous financial rewards tied to the health of the company. It was a major advantage in a hiring market that was very competitive. ROLM became the place to work in Silicon Valley. Its informal style, softened the boundaries between top management and lower echelons. The appealing grounds, cafeteria, and gym blurred the lines between work and play. Architect Goody Steinberg said, "The result was the transformation of corporation into community. A unique spirit developed at ROLM, a spirit of companionship, collegiality, friendship, and mental stimulation. The ROLM campus became a model for the Silicon Valley workplace, and the risk tolerance there became a mantra for Silicon Valley success." ROLM introduced many products in the 5-year span in the early 1980s, telecommunications products, as well as military spec, the mil-spec division products that were continuing on. One of the products that didn't make it would have been the world's first electronic messaging system. RIMS was installed at General Electric as a test. The software for the product, can you hear me?
Yes.
Ran on the CBX's backup computer, which was seldom needed due to the system's general stability. Casson said the design team figured they may as well put all that idle power to good use. We thought text messaging was a nice-to-have feature, not a necessity. But it turns out that it's one of those, once you have it, you can't live without it things. RIMS ran perfectly at GE, just long enough for the people there to get used to get thoroughly hooked. Then one day the CBX system went down. The backup computer turned to its real job of providing telephone service until the necessary repairs could occur. By then, the system had dumped all the previous messages from its memory. GE was furious, said Casson. They were actually doing real business using text messaging. With no alternative message solution to offer, ROLM uninstalled the product and quit mentioning it. But Casson said the team learned an important lesson. The CBX backup computer was for that purpose only, and they needed to find another solution for peripheral computer applications. Thank you very much. Among these products were a couple of real market blockbusters. ROLM phones were the world's first family of digital phones, where the voice was digitized right at the handset and sent down one twisted pair of cable to the CBX. Phone mail was also a real blockbuster. It was the first time that voice messages were digitized, and in fact, for almost all companies, the first time that recorded message could be used on any PBX. ROLM's phone mail was only for the CBX, however. So it eliminated the use of all those pink slips being put into inboxes. Messages could be deleted, forwarded. You could apply your own message on top of that before forwarding it. Outgoing greetings could be easily and quickly changed. Columbia University had thousands of ROLM phones with phone mail on a VLCBX, and it was probably responsible for the first time that something went viral. A mother of a Columbia student left her son an obscene message. She said, "You and the Little Mermaid can go blank yourselves." He forwarded it to a couple of friends saying, "Can you believe my mother said this?" They forwarded it to a couple of friends. And within a few days, the entire campus, professors, administrators, and students had heard the message. 10 years later, the world heard the message when the NPR program This American Life covered a segment on the first time something went viral. ROLM also had some technology blockbusters among all those products. The ROLM link, as I mentioned, the data from the handset passed down a single pair of wires along with the power needed to drive the phone, but also data from a terminal sitting on a desk. At that time, dumb terminals were appearing on desks all over the corporation. And the ability to use one single pair of wires for all of that transmission could save hundreds of thousands of dollars in the installation and materials used in new construction. ROLM also introduced integrated voice data terminals that combined both data and telephone, and a speakerphone, and a Rolodex or contact list, and a calendar with a pull-out keyboard. A year later, this was Cypress. A year later, Cedar was introduced. It stood about 4 inches taller than that because it had 2 floppy disk drives in the base of it. And shortly after that, Juniper, completing the Forest products for ROLM, Juniper came out. That was a plug-in board for the IBM PC that enabled the PC to show all of the telephone information and telephone contact, Rolodex. Yes?
So since this is just about the time of the IBM PC release, can you give sort of a data point as to the cost of any of these units?
The Cypress terminal was priced at about $5,000. I think it would have been threefold to now, so I think it would be about $15,000 equivalent. ROLM was very successful. Revenues were up and to the right. The graph for employees looked a lot like this. And the graph for products looked very similar as well, but a little tapering began to show up on the product, on the profit chart. ROLM had the vision that the CBX could be the hub of corporate voice and data communications. You could combine with phones on the desk and a PC, or rather a terminal on the desk, all that data and the power of the phone flowing to the CBX. Then at the CBX, the proper signals could be distributed to a departmental mini or a mainframe or to the CBX for its appropriate application, saving lots of money in installation of cable. ROLM wanted to find a data partner to make this happen, and the first choice was HP. But when talks with HP stalled, IBM jumped in, first with a partnership, and then little over a year later, with a full-out merger in the biggest deal that Silicon Valley had ever seen up to that time, at $70 a share. It was 40 times return on investment over the IPO after the stock splits. The merger failed to accomplishing anything close to its potential. I was able to get the IBM side of the story from IBM senior executive Ellen Hancock, to whom ROLM reported up the line. Certainly culture clash was one of the problems. This slide exaggerates that because this was taken on Halloween. But it wasn't the only problem. IBM, with 400,000 employees, had the same number of stock options that ROLM, with 10,000 employees, had. ROLM was forced to cut back its options, the number of options granted, which hampered it significantly from hiring competitively within Silicon Valley. And as IBM faced competition on all fronts for the first time since it had been founded in 1911, IBM clamped down and allowed ROLM to hire only IBM employees. IBM sold ROLM to Siemens in 1988. Siemens was the top telecom supplier in Europe, but it had virtually no presence in the US. Its purchase of ROLM catapulted it into the top slot. For 10 years, Siemens kept the ROLM products in its stable, even putting the ROLM name on its own products, as it gained credibility within the US. But in 1998, Siemens dropped the ROLM name from the products. But there are still many CBXs and ROLM phones in use across the US. I received an email yesterday that Hartford Healthcare, with 9 hospitals, all have CBXs and ROLM phones still in use. Many IBM facilities, medical centers, universities, Sears and Macy's, and many others have CBXs and ROLM phones. This was taken at Sears this summer. These are called ROLM phone sightings, and I get emails of these regularly. ROLM's place in history is marked at the Museum of News in Washington, D.C., the Newseum. The ROLM phone marks telecommunications entry into the digital age. And I would be very happy to answer questions.